just went to recording. My name is Jason Johnson, I'm an alcoholic. I'm sober today only by the grace of God and the solution I found in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. I want to thank Eric for the invite or anybody else had anything to do with this. If you're new here, you're wanted, welcome, and needed in Alcoholics Anonymous. And if I go sideways for some reason, there's two things I know today. Alcoholics Anonymous works and God is real. And when I got here, I didn't have any of that in my life. I didn't believe any of that. My home group's called Sandy's Kitchen. We meet on Tuesday nights at 7 p.m. in Happy Valley, Oregon. If you're ever in the state of Oregon and you want to go to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous or need a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, get a hold of me, and I will get you there, or I'll get somebody to a meeting for you. I have a sponsor. His name's Carl Morris out of Covina, California. I'm his favorite, right? I'm self-appointed, but I'm his favorite. If you do know him, I go by, for Christ's sakes, Jason. I guess I don't know how I got that nickname. Something happened and it just stuck, right? So that's my heritage right there, I guess. In a nutshell, everything I have in my life, it's of value or any good or anything I'm going to be as a result of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? I'm just blessed today, and I'm grateful today to have a program that's showing me some way to live, and it wasn't always like that. It started out as a little kid. I started out with my mom. My mom's an old hippie. My mom and dad got divorced. My mom's an old hippie. The reason I know she's a hippie, she smelled like a hippie. I don't know if you have hippies in Mississippi, but they smell like patchouli oil or whatever that smell is, right? Yeah, it was bad, right? And we lived up in the woods with a bunch of other hippies, right? Because they smelled the same way, and there was times we lived in a teepee one time. One time we lived in a log cabin. We lived in a bunch of houses built on the back of trucks. And one time we lived in a bus before it was popular, right? And the thing was, what I found out later is my mom grew pot for a living with all these other hippies up in the woods. So they would stay up in the woods, grow pot, and do whatever they do. And then during certain times of the year, they come down and they'd sell their pot. And I didn't, as a little kid, I didn't know there was anything wrong with that, right? I didn't know I was having fun. I mean, there were some odd things that would happen up there, right? During the day, everybody would get along, but at night they would start drinking and they would start beating on each other. I mean, they would forget they were hippies, right? And just start beating on each other. And I'd see my mom get beat up on a regular basis, right? And the thing was, I didn't know there was anything wrong with that, because the next morning I'd see her hugging the same person that she either beat up or got beat up by. I would see her hugging him and tell him she loved him, right? So as a little kid, I knew there was something wrong there, but I didn't know there was something wrong there. What it did, it gave me some skills. It taught me that, man, when that tension starts going, to either how to de-escalate it by talking or run and hide. And those are the skills I took into life, right? And, I didn't have nothing to judge by. That's what everybody was doing up there. And I thought it was normal. When I started going to school, my mom moved to town. And my mom's house, when we got to town today, I know it was a party house. It was one of those houses at 2 o'clock in the morning. There might be 20 to 30 people in there at 2 o'clock in the morning. As a little kid, I might be the only one in there. My mom was 23, 24 years old. She was 19 when she had me. So I was just a kid, right? And she was just a kid. And she was doing the best she could. And what I know today is, again, I didn't know there was any Leave It to Beaver. I didn't know people read stories to their kids. I learned how to make popcorn on the stove. I learned how to make macaroni and cheese on the stove. I learned how to draw my own bath. I learned how to survive. And every night, man, if nobody is there, what I would do is I just pull down all the blinds, turn on all the lights, and turn the TV up really loud. That way, if somebody came to break in, they would think there was a party going on or people were there, and they go break into the neighbor's house and kill them. And that was my life skills, right? And it worked. I mean, I'm not dead. I made it through those years. But again, I didn't know there was anything different about that, right? It was just the way the cards I was dealt, But my life changed when I was getting ready to go into the first grade. And I remember it was a Sunday before school started, and I was at home on a Sunday night watching this show called Happy Days. And I'm pretty sure some of you know Happy Days here. You look like my age group, right? But I was watching this show and the phone starts ringing. And it's not like today where it goes to voice message or it tells you who's calling. It rings until that person gives up or you pick it up, right? And it rang all the way to commercial. And so I figured it must be important, so I answered it. And it was my grandma. And man, my grandma was way too invested in my life, right? She wanted to know if I was excited to go to school, that I got my clothes lined out, have I taken a bath, have I eaten dinner? Stuff has absolutely nothing to do with Happy Days, right? And I'm just saying yes. And, a little what comes on, my commercial's over, my show comes back on. I said, hey, Grandma, I got to go. My show's back on. And she said, sweetie, let me talk to your mom. I said, oh, my mom's not here. She's down at the tavern. The phone number is 282-4440. You called her. This guy Floyd's going to answer the phone. Ask for Darla. It's going to take a little bit. She's going to come to the phone and tell you she's having one more pitcher of beer and she'll be home. And that was a typical day for me, right? And so my grandma was like really paused. She was quiet. And I said, hey, I got to go. She said, give me that number again. And I gave it to her. She told me, when your show's over, I want you to go to bed. And when you get up, get up to go to school tomorrow, I want you to listen to what the teacher says and be nice to the other kids. That's basically what Carl tells me to do today. Just be kind to others and generous with my time. But I guess my grandma was my first sponsor. But I said, okay, whatever. And I hung up that phone, and I'm watching this show called Laverne and Shirley now. And there's a knock on the door, and I kind of hesitated, and they start beating on the door. So I crawled underneath the end table on the coffee table, knowing I was going to die. Right. And all of a sudden I heard them start beating on the windows, and I knew I was dead. Right. And I'm just panicking underneath this table. And all of a sudden I hear this, hey, Jason, it's Grandma, open the door. And man, just like that, I got relief, right? I just felt better. And I got up and I went to that door, and my grandma opened up. She was standing there. She didn't look happy. She didn't look, I mean, she looked like she'd been crying. She just didn't look like my grandma. And she said, sweetie, get your stuff. You're coming to live at my house. Man, that's like hitting the lottery, right? When you go to Grandma's house, there's Rice Krispie treats, there's homemade cookies, there's popsicles in the freezer, there's sheets on the bed, the sheets match the pillowcases, but most importantly, out of everything, there's somebody there all the time. Right? So it's an easy sell for a kid like my age. And so I grab my stuff and I get in her car. We drive to her house. I run up these stairs. I'm cutting through the front room. And as I'm going through the front room, headed to the kitchen, I hear this, hey. And I turn around. It's my grandpa. And he's like, what are you doing here? I was like, man, I live here now. And I didn't know my grandma didn't run it by him. Right? She didn't go, hey, I'm going to go get Jason. He's going to live here the rest of his life. He just looked at me and said, yeah, you do, buddy. Come here. And he gave me a hug, and I fell asleep on that man's lap every night for the next 4 or 5 years because he made me feel safe. Right. And look, I ended up in AA. So I wasn't an easy kid growing up. Right. I've never been that guy. You know, I remember being in the 3rd grade, and they were doing, what was it? Career day is, I guess you want to call it. And so on Friday, everybody was going to dress up what they were going to want to be when they grew up. Right. And on Wednesday, the teacher's going around, she's asking everybody what they want to be. And, you know, people want to be president of the United States, doctors, police officers, firemen, nurses, all that stuff. And I remember when Miss Bo got to me, she said, Jason, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, a bank robber, right? And man, she just gave me that look of disbelief. And I had 2 friends change occupations and join my gang just like that. They wanted to be bank robbers. And it just kind of started going sideways. But I was just as shocked as it came out of my mouth as she was, right? And, you know, I got sent home that day with a letter, and I came back on Friday as a rodeo clown. But, you know, that's just the way it is, right? But I remember that weekend sitting on underneath the apple tree with Stevie. And this is the thinking I have. This is what my family was dealing with. My friend Stevie said, you're going to be a bank robber when you grow up? I said, yeah, I think I am. And I said, but there's no banks on our block to rob to practice. And he goes, yeah, but there's a Kool-Aid stand. I said, that's great, right? So I went and got a bandana, a BB gun, and I got a cowboy hat, and I rode my bike up to the corner Kool-Aid stand, and I robbed it, right? And look, if you're going to rob a Kool-Aid stand, you're a little old. But if you are, they don't have any money. Right? All they have is Kool-Aid, right? And so it wasn't going really well. So I did what I saw on TV. I took a kid hostage, and I took him back to my house, and I tied him up to the back of the clothesline pole and told those guys to go get their piggy banks, right? And I remember standing there looking at this kid thinking how long it's going to be for these guys to bring me their money. But at 5 o'clock at my house, when my grandma yells dinner, you have to go eat or you don't eat. And I hear this dinner, and I was like, man, I got to go. I'll be back in about 20 minutes. I'll see you in a little bit. So I put my BB gun down and my bandana down and my cowboy hat by him, and I went inside and I'm eating dinner, and everything's going great until the officer showed up. So I had my first police contact in the 3rd grade. And I remember it just didn't go really well because in those days, if a police officer showed up at a house, the whole neighborhood showed up at the house. So everybody's in my backyard, all my neighbors in my backyard, and they're trying to get this young man untied from the clothesline pole. And I'm trying to negotiate, saying the knots wouldn't be that tight if he wasn't squirming. Do whatever you have to do. And my grandpa starts laughing really loud, right? And my grandma goes, what's so funny? He goes, man, you can't make this up, which made her really mad and made everybody else laugh. And my grandma said, hey, you know what? Get in that house. You're grounded for a year or a month. And I was like, holy macro. I've never been grounded before, and I've never been grounded inside a house for a month. So now I'm crying. And you know, my grandpa went to bat for me. He talked to my grandma and said, you know, look, I didn't tie that young man up to the clothesline pole. There's no need to punish me by grounding him to the inside of the house, right? And so they made a decision that I'd be grounded to the block. And, you know, right away, that guy became my hero. But as I got older, he became a problem, right? Because he started turning me in when I got in trouble. He started telling the police where I lived, where I worked, how much money I made. He just didn't like me, man. I thought he hated me, right? Because I was just a troubled kid, right? I guess, you know, I was a punk, I guess is I think what I heard him saying a couple of times, right? He's just a punk. And so I just thought he didn't love me, right? And but my grandma, on the other hand, man, she loved me no matter what, right? And my grandma's that kind of person that just believes in you when you don't want them to believe in you. And for the longest time as a little kid, I didn't understand that. But I remember where our relationship changed. I was in the 6th grade and I got kicked off a school bus. It was the middle of my first year of middle school. And I got kicked off the school bus and I had to walk home. And my grandma pulled up and I thought she was going to give me a ride home. And she said, "No, sweetie, we need to go in this office and talk to some people." And I remember we went into this room and there was a round table and there was a teacher, two of my teachers, a teacher from a special needs school, my principal and a couple of counselors on one side of the table. And there was 2 chairs where we sat down and listened. And they proceeded to tell my grandma everything I'd done wrong in the last 3 months, that I had no self-control, that I hit other kids, I talked out of line, that I was always pushing and stealing. It actually made me sound kind of bad, right? And I remember thinking, man, I wish my grandma would say something, right? And she just sat there and listened, and I could see she had that same look on her face as when she came to pick me up. And they got done and she said, "May I say something?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Look, I'm not going to deny Jason did any of those things. He lives at my house. He's a tough kid, but he's a good kid. And the reason I know that is every morning he runs down to Mrs. Harrington's house and he throws a newspaper up on the front porch so she doesn't have to come down the steps. And the young man, Shane, who's simple-minded, every time I see him at the church on Sunday or at the grocery store, the first thing he asks is, 'Where's Jason?' Because nobody picks on him when Jason's around, and Jason always picks him first for sports when they're picking teams. Nobody told him to do those things. He did them on his own. So I know there's a good kid inside of there, and I think it's our responsibility to tap into that. And I ended up having my best year of school that year. But I remember most importantly walking out of that class and looking up at my grandma walking out that hall, looking up at her, thinking, man, somebody loves me, right? All up to that time, I thought I was just a nuisance and I was just causing problems. And that was the first time in my life I believed somebody loved me, man. And I went wherever that lady went, right? She became my best friend. That young man I tied up to the clothesline pole, Sean, became one of my best friends. And same year I was in the 6th grade and we went over to a buddy's house, Leif, to sleep in the backyard. I don't know what it's like back in your place, but in Oregon, you don't get to sleep in the backyards a lot. But it was a summertime and we were having a good time. And Leif's mom came out and said, "Hey, I put $5 or $10 on the counter for the pizza. We ordered you a pizza. When the pizza guy gets here, pay him for the pizza and stay in the house," right? All the adults are going bowling. And we're like, great, right? And the pizza came and my friend Leif said, "Hey, pizza tastes better with beer." I'd never drank beer before, but I said, "Yes, it does." And he went downstairs and he brought up this case of Lucky Lager beer. I don't know if they have it in your area, but it's nasty. It's not one of those things. Look, I took my first drink, I almost gagged. I had to hold my nose and hang in there, right? I had no spiritual experience. I was just trying to act like I was tough, right? And you know what? Within about 45 minutes, I started thinking I was tough. And we're in that backyard throwing rocks at cars or whatever you do when you're in the 6th grade. And man, about another hour later, I got food poisoning, man, and I'm sicker than a dog, and I don't understand it. And I tell my friends, I have to go home. I don't feel good. And so I rode my bike home, I guess, drunk. I said it might be my first DUI. And I get to my grandma's house, and I walk in there. I tell my grandma I don't feel good. She just looked at me with disgust, and I went in there, and I was sick all night, right? Nobody came and checked on me. Nobody did their jobs in my family. I was just sick. And I mean, I was sick like I had never been sick before. And I finally fell asleep. And that next morning, I wake up, and my grandpa's at the end of my bed yelling, "Get up, you got to go to work." I was like, man, I don't feel good, Gramps. He said, "Get up, you got to go to work." I said, "I don't even have a job." He said, "If you're going to drink like a big boy, you're going to work like a big boy. Now let's go." And I thought my grandma would save me because that's her job. And as I'm walking out, she handed me an egg salad sandwich and a thermos of warm milk and told me, "Have a great day." And we went over and picked up Leif and Sean, and we had to go pick strawberries, right? It's against the law for a minor or anybody under 13 years of age to pick strawberries in the state of Oregon now. So actually did something with my life, right? Because, man, it was the worst day of my life. I picked strawberries, got sick, picked strawberries, got sick, picked strawberries, got sick. And I remember looking at my buddies telling them, man, I'm done with this drinking thing. And I remember my friend Sean said, "You didn't like the alcohol?" I said, "I don't mind the alcohol. I just don't want to work," right? So I quit cold turkey. No AA, no 12 steps, no treatment. I'm just done, right? And I did pretty good until I got to high school. And because of the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, this is where I realized that obsession kicked in for me, right? Because what I did is I started saving my money, lunch money on Monday, the weekdays, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, pitching in with some other kids on Friday and shoulder tapping and drinking on the weekends. So we played sports during the week and we drank on the weekends. Nobody was dying of a heroin overdose. Nobody was going to jail. We were just having fun, right? And life was good. On May 1st, 1989, I stole a motorcycle. I used to say I borrowed it, but I stole the motorcycle and I got in a high-speed chase and I crashed on this bridge. And I woke up in an ICU not knowing what happened, right? And so I'm in this room and I'm screaming, I'm alive. And this nurse comes in and says, "We know you're alive." And I asked her what happened. She said, you were in a drunk driving accident." I said, oh man, did I hurt anybody? She said, no. She goes, you were on a motorcycle. I said, I don't own a motorcycle. She said, we know that too. And, and I found out that I got in a high-speed chase. I stole somebody's motorcycle and I was drunk, right? And I remember sitting in that hospital telling myself I'll never drink alcohol again, ever. But you know what? 2 weeks after getting out of that hospital, and they told me I was going to lose my left leg. My left leg was off, and they sewed it back on. And I remember telling me I wasn't going to die, but I was going to lose my left leg or not walk normal. So when I got out of that hospital, I had everything in my power that I was not going to drink again, right? But 2 weeks after getting out of that hospital, the only thing I know how to do to kill that anxiety and that fear and that embarrassment and that shame is to drink, right? So eventually I'm just lowering my standards to keep up with my quality of life, right? I'm bouncing from couch to couch. I'm sleeping in homeless shelters. I'm sleeping in houses because that's just what I do when I drink, and eventually I'd be in somebody's dope house, and about once a month, one of my uncles would show up wherever I'm staying and take me to a payphone and make me call my grandma. And I'd ask him, why do I have to call grandma? And they'd say, man, every time you do this, she calls every hospital, every institution, all the jails, and then she calls all of us and then all your friends. Has anybody seen Jason? Anybody know where Jason is? Is Jason alive? Can somebody please go find Jason? So you need to call her and tell her you're alive so we can get some sleep, right? And I would say, okay. And I'd call my grandma and I'd talk to her for, 10, 15 minutes on a payphone and tell her I had a job and I was working out of town and I'm doing really good, right? And I might be 3 blocks from her house, but that I would come see her when I got back to town. And in my heart, I'm not a bad person. I wanted to go see her, but when I put alcohol in my body, I justify any actions I have, right? So when I put alcohol in my body, my best thinking is if I don't see you face to face, I'm not lying to you and I'm not stealing from you. I'm doing you a favor, and every once in a while I would go over there and see her because I was broke, right? And I know she'd leave $5 in her purse or $20 in her purse sticking out, and I would steal it, right? And today I know she did that because that was her way of just making me okay, right? And I would do that over and over to that lady. And what's the deal is she didn't have Al-Anon. She didn't have anything. She just had a grandson that she was scared to death that was going to die, right? And I was okay with that. On December 3rd, 1997, my Uncle Leroy showed up. I was living in a tent in the backyard of an abandoned house, and he let me know my grandma had been in ICU for a couple of weeks and that they took her off of life support and I should probably come say goodbye. I told him I don't really want to go. He said, look, you're going to go. And he's a big biker guy, so I kind of went. And I remember getting in his truck, and right when we got in the truck, he handed me a pint of vodka, and he said, just chug it, right? And I chugged this vodka, and by the time I got to this hospital, I'm okay with who I am, right? I know I'm a piece of crap that's not going to amount to nothing, but I'm okay with who I am. And I get off this elevator, and I have a big family, and all my family's sitting on one side of the room, and there's nobody on the other side, so I go sit over there. And they're only letting a couple people in the room at a time because it's one of those rooms where 2 or 3 people can go in, and then they come out and you switch. And I sat there and nobody came over and talked to me. None of my cousins, my mom, nobody came over. And finally, my aunt came over to me and said, you need to get in there, say goodbye, and get out of here. And I said, all right. And I went in there, and my Uncle Gary was standing there, and my Uncle John. My Uncle Gary said, man, just talk to her like she's here. Hold her hand. She hasn't been awake all day, but just talk to her like she's here. And take as long as you want. And so I sat down, and I held her hand, and I started talking to her, right, like you do. And she opened up her eyes and she started talking back to me, man, and I panicked because everybody started running to the door because people had flown in to see her. And I did what I know how to do when I'm in that situation. I told Grandma, I'm doing really good. I have a great job. There's a lot of people here that want to see you. I'll come back tomorrow when it's not so busy and talk to you some more. And she said, okay, sweetie. She told me she was going to pray for me, and she told me she loved me, and I told her I loved her. And I remember I was walking out. She told my Uncle Gary, he's a good kid. You watch, he'll do something with his life. And I remember it just ate me up inside, and I just sunk. And I went back to my tent, and I do what you have to do. And a couple of days later, my Uncle Dale showed up to let me know that my grandma had passed and that his family would come pick me up and I could sit with them at the memorial. And that day came for him to pick me up at that abandoned house, and I hid in a closet with some Goldschlager and some Jägermeister, and I didn't come out, right? Because I was look, my best thinking is when I put alcohol in my body, why would I show up for somebody that loved me when she's dead, when I can't even show up when she's alive? And I didn't want everybody to tell me what they thought. So what I did, man, is I just drank, and I didn't go. And I remember I could hear him beating on the window saying, you're going to regret this for the rest of your life. And I just didn't care. And what happened is I was just a mess. And the next 2 weeks, man, I was putting alcohol in my body, but it wasn't killing those voices in my head, and it wasn't killing that anxiety. And it was a Sunday morning, and I called my Uncle Gary Collect. So I knew he was going to kick my butt, but I didn't, I was hopefully we could do it at church. So I asked him if he was going to church. He said yes. I asked him if I could meet him in there, and he said yes. And I go to this church, and his family's at one end of the pew, and I'm at the other end of the pew. And they start singing this song, How Great Thou Art, or something like that. And I kind of started feeling his emotions. And then they sang that dang song, Amazing Grace. And now I'm crying like a little kid. And I look at my uncle. I said, man, I think I have a drinking problem. And the whole church went quiet. He goes, you think? I said, I might have a drug problem too if it makes you feel better about yourself. And this is what he said to me. He said, that's great. Come over to my house. We'll feed you. You can take a shower. We'll wash your clothes. And we'll give you $20 and tell you can go figure out how you're going to do with your life. And I thought, that's great. So I go to his house. I take a shower. When I come out of the shower, there's a thing called the phone book on the counter. And he says, hey, you're going to go to treatment. I said, what's treatment? He said, this is no time for negotiations. Look up hospitals and find drug and alcohol treatment centers. So it's Sunday afternoon. I opened up the phone book to hospitals, and the first one said Portland Adventist. It's an Adventist hospital. I said, okay. I called it thinking they would be closed on Sunday. This lady answered. I told her I think I have a drinking problem, and she got all excited and passed me over to another lady. I told that lady I might have a drug problem. The next thing I know, she tells me, hey, can you be here tomorrow morning at 8 a.m.? And we can do an assessment. And if we can get you into our center, we will. And if we can't, we'll help you get into another center. And I said, that's great. I got off the phone. I told my uncle, hey, I got an assessment thing tomorrow at 8 a.m. Give me $20. I'll tell you how it went. He said, no, you're staying the night here. And man, it just got worse, right? I hadn't had anything in my body for a few days already. And now I'm sleeping on this plastic couch, which he calls leather. I had this little dog licking me all night, and I'm sweating from the inside out, and it's miserable, right? And I'm just a mess, right? The next morning I wake up and he's like, man, you look like crap. So I went and took another shower. When I came out, he went to take a shower. For some reason, right when he went in the shower, I remembered he had a liquor cabinet. I went to this liquor cabinet and I got a Coke can. I put some Bacardi 151 in it and I started drinking it. By the time he's out of the shower, I'm ready to go to treatment. I don't know what it is, but I'm all in, baby. We get in his truck and I'm drinking my soda thing. And he says, man, I smell alcohol. I said, it's not me. I'm going to treatment, for Christ's sakes. And he just looked at me and said, whatever. Now I know that's what everybody says when you're headed to detox, right? And so we get there and I made a vital mistake. I went to hide my pop can in the bathroom and he went in and answered yes to some questions and I was in treatment just like that. And let me tell you, I didn't know what detox and treatment was, but I know this, I made a big mistake, right? Because this treatment center had 5 guys in it and it had no caffeine, no sugar, and no women, right? Whoa, I'm 29 years old. Those are big deals, right? This is 1997. And I'm thinking to myself, man, I got to get out of here. This is a huge mistake. So I'm looking, I didn't know you could just leave. I thought it was like prison, right? So I'm watching the elevator go up and down. I'm watching shift changes. I'm watching people that bring the meals in. I'm going to escape from this place. But as I'm planning my escape, I hear these guys talking about Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, what's Alcoholics Anonymous? And this is the miracle that got me to AA. They said there's caffeine, there's sugar, and there's women. I said, sweet, I'm in. How do we get there? They said, a van's going to pick us up and take us. I said, even better, man, I can escape from there, right? So I get in this van, but I need to tell you, about 3 years before this went down, my dad, who I'd never seen in my whole life, called my mom to pay back all the back child support he owed. And I went to this bank and I saw this guy for 3 or 4 minutes. I got my half of the money, which I paid back because of sponsorship. And I said hi and I left, right? I don't need a dad, but I need that money to run and gun. 3 years later, I'm in a van and I prayed to a guy that I don't really believe in. I said, man, please don't let me know anybody in this AA thing. And if I do, please don't let me owe him any money, right? And so we get to this meeting and sure enough, there's caffeine, there's some sugar on the table, and there's some ladies in this room. And so I'm looking around the room trying to figure out who I'm going to marry to bust me out of this treatment center. And I see a bunch of guys standing in the back, and I tell these guys, wow, that looks like my dad. And one of the guys I'm with says, you don't know who your dad is? I said, I've only seen my dad one time in 28 years at the time. And there was a break in this meeting. And so I walk up to this guy because they made me do it. I walked up to this guy, I said, hey, do you know who I am? He said, no. I said, I think you're my dad. And he said, Jason? And I said, yeah. And I met my dad at my very first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, right? And it changed my life, right? He was doing a 9th step when he was doing that. He was an active member. He had 3 years of sobriety at that time. He died right during COVID. I think he had 25 or something right in there when he died. And man, he gave me a hug and told me if I do this thing, my life would get different, right? And he picked me up from that treatment center and he took me to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous where I kissed this girl. She got pregnant. And then she got divorced, and then we got married. And that's not how you do AA if you're new here, but that's how Jason did it, right? And that's what happened, right? I started doing Alcoholics Anonymous, but I was only going to 1 meeting a month. And this 1 meeting a month, I just couldn't. I was just crazy, right? And so it was a speakers meeting, and I didn't want to go one night, and I was a raffle chair, and I started arguing with my wife, asked her for a divorce. She said no. She said she was going to the meeting, and look, I was a mess. And so I wrote a resignation letter to Alcoholics Anonymous because I was going to take it to this guy, John B., because I was going to resign from AA. And so I dated it, signed it. I took it to this guy named John, who I thought was the president of AA in Oregon. a big speakers meeting. There's 500-600 people. I walk up to the front of all these people and I hand him my resignation letter, and he starts reading it and he says, no. I said, I didn't know you could say no. And he says, I'm not going to allow you to leave Alcoholics Anonymous. And what came out of my mouth is, will you sponsor me? Man, and he quit laughing just like that. He's like, are you willing to go to anything for victory over alcohol? I was like, man, I was just resigning from AA a few minutes ago with a letter. And he told me I had to do some things. I had to pray twice a day. I had to get on my knees. I had to say, please help, thank you, amen in the morning. And at night, I got to get on my knees and just say thanks. God don't need to hear any more from me. He said that I had to go to 5 meetings a week, 3 where he was at. That's a little overkill. He told me I had to read 2 pages out of the big book until the rest of my sobriety every night. And he told me I had to call him every day at 7:30 in the morning. And I couldn't go to meet. I couldn't drink in between meetings, right? He said, if I do those things, my life would get better. You know, and he was right. Within 30 days, I became a greeter. My job in Alcoholics Anonymous was to shake every woman's hand that walked through the door and make sure she felt safe. And every man that walked through the door, I was supposed to hug him and tell him I'm doing better every day in every way. Very awkward, very unnecessary, very strange, right? Because some of these guys hugged me 2 or 3 times and I was like, whoa, you know what I mean? But I did it because it helped me get to where I was at. Within 8 years, I thought I was doing AA. And what happened for me at 8 years, I couldn't stand you people anymore. It always sounded like wah, wah, wah. I knew whose birthday was going to say. I knew who was coming. And so I started selling drugs. I imagine nobody's ever tried to sell drugs sober in Mississippi, but in Oregon, I tried. And I got pretty good at it, and I was doing very well at it, but I was still going to AA, sitting in the back, judging you people. On May 5th, 2007, I had bought a car, and I took it to a place called Les Schwab. It puts wheels and tires on. I put wheels and tires on this car, and I drove out, and the wheel fell off, and I crashed. They rented me this thing called the Chrysler 300. It looked like a Rolls Royce. I thought I had arrived. I get in this car and I go meet these guys I've been meeting every day for about a year, and I pick up a substantial amount of methamphetamines, and I'm driving down the road, and all of a sudden all these cops swarm my car. And it's a rental car. I have a valid driver's license, proof of insurance. I haven't had a drink or drug in 9 years at this time, so I figured I could talk my way out of whatever's going to happen. But I had this, well, it's 157 grams of meth, so I was like, I didn't know what to do with it, so I put it underneath the front seat because I figured I could get away with it, right? It's a rental car. So I put it underneath the front seat, and I'm waiting for them to do their thing, and then finally an officer walks up and he taps on the window and he says, Jason, which is another bad sign, didn't even ask me for my ID. He said, could you shut the car off and step up on the curb? And I said, I sure can. And I shut that car off and I opened up the door to get out, and as I'm getting out of here, and I look down and the seat's moving back all by itself. I've never had a car with a memory seat. I didn't even know they had cars with memory seat. And the seat went all the way back, and my dope's in the middle of the floor, right? And you can't yell do over, and you can't yell time out, right? You're kind of like crap, right? I'm going to tell you, that's what I said. So I just shut the door and I went up on the curb and hoping they wouldn't see it, and they did. And I got charged with commercial delivery, commercial possession, racketeering, intimidation of a federal witness, and a gun charge with 9 years of sobriety, stealing a seat in Alcoholics Anonymous. And my life crashed, right? I ended up putting a needle in my arm. My wife divorced me. She has remarried me, right? So, you know, when she married me, everybody's like, why would you marry that guy? Then when she divorced me, they were all clapping. She has remarried me, and they're like, why would you do that again? And, you know, I was just a train wreck, right? And I ended up getting sentenced to 48 months in prison. But it wasn't until I was locked up in the hole by myself that I made that decision that I'm an alcoholic, right? I admitted to my innermost self that I was an alcoholic. And when I did that, my life changed. You know, I got on my knees in that jail cell and I said, please help, thank you, amen. If I got any kind of relief, I got on my knees and I said, thanks. I ended up getting released at 3 months and 27 days because some judges in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous in my area signed a piece of paper for me to get a suspended sentence. So I had to do my time in the state of Oregon, and I had to do 3 years of parole. And I've been an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous in good standing since that day, right? And I never take it for granted. If somebody tells me to go to a meeting in the jail, I go to meet in jail. I take a meeting to a detox. I have a step study at my house. I do whatever I have to do to help pay that debt back. I'll never be able to make that debt back, but I do whatever I can, you know. And I got my stuff back, right? But you'd think my life would get better. But look, this is who I am. I have a daughter who's 24 years old right now, and she's getting ready to go to law school. She just graduated with her master's, right? And, you know, the other day, like last year during school, a bunch of the girls were trying to get her sorority to get her to run for president of the United States. They're doing some mock thing at her college. So I heard that, and as I was walking through the kitchen, I said, hey, can I get a cabinet position if you become president of the United States? She said no. Right? She didn't even hesitate. I said, well, what can I do at the White House? She said, you could be a greeter, right? So if my daughter ever makes it to the White House, you guys need to get there fast because I might not have the job for very long. But it's amazing to me the kid is who she is today, right? Because this is the kind of dad I am. I remember when she was 17 years old, My wife came up to me one day and said, hey, we're going on vacation. I said, where are we going? She said, Canada. I said, I can't go to Canada. She said, we know. And the way they went, they left me, right? And my daughter and her, they go on vacation. They're gone for 2 weeks. They come back, and my daughter goes straight to her. My wife comes into the kitchen and says, hey, I need to talk to you, and it's serious. You can't overreact. I said, what is it? She said, when Bailey and I were in Canada, Bailey got a tattoo. Holy mackerel, I wasn't ready for that. I saw tramp stamp. I saw stripper poles. I saw Aerosmith videos. I went batshit crazy, right? It's my 17-year-old daughter. She got a tattoo. Somebody's going to jail. We're getting divorced, and I got to figure out how to get that tattoo off her back, man. And I haven't even seen the thing. I'm livid, right? I'm telling my wife she's going to prison, and I'm screaming at her, and she's not listening. So I go upstairs and I yell at my daughter, and I say things to my daughter that if you said to me, I'm not afraid to go back to prison, right? But I said things to her that you shouldn't say to her, and she's just sitting there crying. And I did what every good aide is. I got out and I went for a drive. And when I got in my car, I called an Al-Anon because I figured Al-Anon knows how to get them arrested, AA arrested, probably has had a tattoo removed, and knows what to do here. Probably can get a divorce, right? And I called this Al-Anon. I asked her, I told her, what do I do? And she goes, what happened? I told her. And she goes, you want to know what I heard just happened? I said, sure. She said, man, you just told your daughter that she's not beautiful and any decisions she makes are not to your standards and her body's your body. And she said a bunch of stuff that made me sound like really bad, right? I was like, I didn't mean that. She goes, but that's what she heard. I go, what do I do? She goes, you got to go back and make that right. And I could hear her husband in the background yelling, you better invite God to go with you. So I'm driving down the road going like this on my speakerphone because I don't need no help from AA. But I got to my house and I sat in my driveway and I did what you guys told me to do. I invited God to go with me, and I went inside. I told my wife I overreacted, and she said I did. I went upstairs, and my daughter's still crying, 17 years old. And I had to apologize. I said, man, I'm an idiot. I don't care what you do with your body. I don't care what kind of tattoo you have. I don't care who you love. I don't care your political. All you need to know, you're the best thing I've ever done, and I love you with all my heart. And you never have to be a fear of me. And she says, I know, Dad. She goes, you want to see the tattoo? I was like, whoa. And she lifts up her shirt, and on the side of her chest, there's an AA symbol, and it says one day at a time. I'm like, oh, Jesus, hope she's not alcoholic. And then there's his hand going like this, and a hand going like this. And I'm like, geez, what's with the praying hands? We're not Catholic. But I haven't said anything. Those are my inside voices, right? And she said, you want to know what it means? I said, sure. She said, if it wasn't for Alcoholics Anonymous, you and Mom would have never met, and I wouldn't be here. I said, oh, that's pretty good. She said, the hand going like this is Mom's hand because she always serves the coffee and makes the cookies at the meeting. And the hand going like this is yours, Dad, because you're always welcoming people to Alcoholics Anonymous and give them a hand up. So now I'm sitting on the side of this bed crying with my daughter. And this lady, Polly Pistol, said that was God kicking me in the nuts, right? But today I have a relationship with my wife and my daughter, right? And I have a good relationship with my wife and my daughter, you know, and I'm grateful for that. I want to hit the men's. I only have a few more minutes. I want to hit the men's part of this thing. You know, my grandparents were the toughest thing I had to do. My grandpa was alive, and I went to his house and I said, hey, Grandpa, I don't know if you know this or not, but I stole a bunch of money from you and Grandma. And I borrowed a bunch of money. And because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I need to make that right. But I don't know how much it is. He says, I do. And I go, what? And he goes in my grandma's room. He comes back and he has these spiral notebooks from just stacks of them. He opened it, says 1997 or 1979. Jason borrowed 25 cents. Jason mowed the lawn, has 10 cents credit. Jason stole $5. I mean, it's all the way to right before she died. She was like the mob, right? This little church lady was the mob. She had every coin, every contract, every IOU. From when I could barely talk, I think the lady started writing this stuff down. I looked at my grandpa. I said, I can't pay all this back. He says, I know you can't. I said, what do I do? He says, you just keep helping other people. And I said, all right. And so then I asked him in 1984, I said, Jason stole $5. Jason stole $5. Jason stole $5. So I asked him, hey, how do you know I stole $5 here in 1984? Because that's an easy one. Every Thursday night, I put $5 in the coffee cup in the hutch. Every Friday morning, it was gone. The only people who live here is you and Grandma. You think Grandma stole the $5? Oh, man, but if you know I stole it, why don't you say something? He said, Jason, I asked you many a times, did you steal the money? And you said no. I said, but Grandpa, you knew what I did. And this is what he said to me, Jason, stealing isn't wrong until it's wrong to you. And I'd rather you steal from me than our neighbors or your friends. And that's the guy I thought was out to get me, right? And I ended up leaving. I came back because I had to get him a gift, and I bought him cable TV till the day he died. And I remember a couple weeks after he got cable TV, he called me and we talked about Pawn Stars. We talked about the ESPN being on 24 hours. He talked about news. And at the end of that conversation, he told me, man, this is one of the coolest things anybody's ever got me as a gift. You know, and I was making an amends. You know, amends with my grandma, man, I didn't know how to make that because she had passed, right? I wrote letters. I sat with people. I went to the graveside. I looked for butterflies, dragonflies, ladybugs, tomatoes, ants, whatever, right? I did everything you people told me to do. And I get a little bit of relief, but I wouldn't get relief, right? I drive by there sometimes, or I get that ache so down. How do I treat somebody that loved me that much that way, right? And I remember one day I'm flying back from a conference, and I get this text from this guy named Jimmy Jack, and it's a story about a little boy. And this little boy, he was the firstborn in his family, and his sisters were born, and his dad started paying attention to his sisters, and he got jealous. But he knew his dad loved football, so he went and asked his mom and dad if he could play football, and they signed him up. And right away, he knew this was a bad idea. He's not a football player, but he would go to practice and he'd play, because after every practice and every game, his dad would come find him and give him a hug and tell him he loved him and how proud he was of him. So the kid just loved that. He kept doing it and kept doing it. And his senior year of high school, his team's going to the state championship, and it's a couple weeks before the big game, and they're at practice. The coach calls him over and he says, "Son, I don't know how to tell you this." He said, "Your dad had a heart attack today and he didn't make it." And the young man hit his knees and he started crying, and people gathered around, and he got up and he asked the coach, "Is it okay if I go home a little early today?" The coach said, "Man, this is just a game. Go home and take care of your family and don't worry about football." He said, "Okay." And 2 weeks later, when the big game came, the kid didn't show up for the game until about the third quarter. And when he showed up, his team was losing really bad. He runs out and the whole stands cheered because everybody knows what happened. And he runs up and he asks the coach if he can play. And look, he's the worst player on their team, but the coach says, "Whatever, we're losing anyway." And he gets in there, and the kid intercepts the ball and runs it back for a touchdown. And he makes some tackles and he leaves him in there. This young man ends up winning the game, state championship for his team, right? The worst player on his team. And that night, as the coach is leaving the locker room, he sees a young man sitting by himself. And so he walks over and starts talking to him. He says, "Man, just take as long as you want. And now it's your senior year." And the young man says, "Thanks." The coach turns back around. He says, "Son, I need to ask you something." He says, "What happened out there tonight? You're not really the best kid I've ever coached. So that was a phenomenal game of football. What took place?" And the young man says, "Coach, I don't know if you know this or not, but after every game and every practice, my dad would come give me a hug and tell me he loved me and how proud he was of me." And the coach said, "Man, you had a great dad." And the young man says, "Coach, I don't know if you know this or not, but my dad was blind. So tonight was the first night he ever really got to see me play." And just like that, I got relief. Just like that, I know that every time I walk into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous and I say, "My name is Jason Johnson, I'm an alcoholic," my grandma gets to see that, right? She's got to see everything I've done, everything I do in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I know that when I die and I go to that big meeting in the sky that everybody's talking, I'm going there first because I want to make sure there's a Bill, a Bob, and a Jesus, right? One of those three guys that don't exist, I'll let you know. But I know who's going to be waiting for me in the parking lot. It's going to be my grandparents, right? My grandpa will wave at me because if you're not a half hour early, you're late, right? I don't know how that works when you're dead, but he'll complain about it. But you know what's going to happen? For the very first time as an adult, I'm going to be able to hug my grandpa because I've been hugging men on a daily basis in my meeting. I'm going to be able to hug him and tell him I love him and thank him for giving me a safe place to live. My grandma, she'll probably be dancing around the parking lot praising Jesus and thanking God and telling my grandpa, "I told you so." And I know what she's going to do. She's going to hug me. She's going to tell me she loved me. She's going to tell me she's proud of me. Right? And I'm going to be able to look her in the eyes for the first time and tell her, "Grandma said, damn this thing. These people in this program called Alcoholics Anonymous, they found a solution to their problem and they introduced it to me. But most importantly, Grandma, some of those people showed me some grace. And in doing that, they introduced me to that kid inside of here that you only believed existed." I'll never be able to pay that debt back, right? I'll never be able to pay that debt back. Nor do I want to ever be able to pay that debt back. I want to keep doing the deal, and that's the gift I got. About 3 months ago, I had to go speak. I'll end with this story. I had to go speak at a state convention in wherever the Rudy movie was, wherever Notre Dame is, right? So I'm at the state convention and I get there and right away I walk into the state convention and I know they got the wrong guy because it's every past delegate, it's every for 5 states, they're all at this one thing. And I'm thinking, oh, good God, they got the wrong guy. And I was willing to pay my way home. I told this guy, "Hey, you just need to get a different speaker. I'm not that guy." But there was a slogan on there for the weekend. It said "a seat for everyone." And I just thought to myself, well, that's going to bite him in the ass in like 48 hours, but all right. So I stayed and I started having a great weekend. I started listening to these reports and I started doing all this. And Saturday night, the banquet came and I got to do my talk. And when the talk was over, they had this thing called a gratitude line, right? And I don't know why they call it a gratitude line because like 10% of the people don't like you, right? 5% of them are only going up there because they just got done telling their sponsor, "That was the worst hour of my life I'll never get back." So they're coming up to thank you for that. And there's some people that just don't like you because you swore, you talk about drugs or whatever that is, right? 90%, yeah, love you. 10%, not so much. So it's a pretty big line because it's one of those, service people say they do everything, right? So I'm shaking hands and I'm kind of hungry because I didn't eat much at the banquet. And I look up to see if how much longer the line is. And I catch eye contact with this lady, right? And I look down really fast because it's that awkward kind of eye contact. So I look up again and she's staring at me. So I look back down because I know she's the one, right? She's gonna lay into me. I could just feel it. She just has that look of just, he's mine, right? and a few people go by, and she should be there by now, right? And so I look up and she's not there, and I take a big breath, like, ah, thank you. And I look back and she's at the end of the line, and we can lock eyes again. And I'm like, oh shit, right? So now all I can think about is this lady's gonna rip into me, and this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. Finally it gets down, it's just her and I. And it's an older lady, and she's looking at me, and I'm just standing there. She said, I'm a grandma, can I give you a hug? And I'm like, man, absolutely. I thought you were gonna kill me, right? So we hugged and we started talking, and she told me she had a 24-year-old granddaughter, who's out there running and gunning and doing things to her body that she shouldn't be doing. And a lot of people saying she's doing a lot of bad things. And she said, I'm not even supposed to be here tonight. I'm not a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm here because a friend that prays for my granddaughter every Sunday at church, her husband and her had tickets to the banquet, and he got sick, and she invited me to come hear a story of hope. And I want to thank you for giving me hope. You know, and I just hugged, and you feel that emotion, right? And I kind of got goosebumps, and I just didn't know what to say, right? And she started to walk away, and then she turned around and she goes, hey, you ever figure out why your grandma kept track of all that stuff in those books, that money? I said, no, I asked my grandpa one time. He said he didn't know, but he started laughing and changed the channel on the TV, so we just never talked about it again. He said, I know why she did it. I go, why is that? And he said, she said to me, she did it because she knew no matter all the bad things people were saying about you, one day you'd be the one to come back and make that right. Right? And I just gave her a hug, and I just sat there, right? And I remember sitting down, and she walked away, and I remember sitting there thinking, man, I think I just made amends to my grandma in person. Right? And I was standing there, and all of a sudden I see these feet standing by me, and I look up, and there's this big tall guy, and he's a young kid, and he's standing there, he's just crying, right? And I stand up, he goes, man, I'm not crying because I'm sad. I said, okay. He goes, man, I have 60 days. And I listened to everything that lady just said, and I felt that. He said, I felt that right here. And I said, yeah, I felt that too. He goes, man, I got goosebumps. And I said, man, this guy told me one time, if you get goosebumps, that's God rubbing you on the shoulder, telling you you're welcome, right? What I know today is that's the buzz I'm shooting for. That's what I'm looking for when I come into Alcoholics Anonymous. I hope the first time I got goosebumps, and the first time I got moved to emotion was the time I stood in front of the mirror and I was okay with who I was, right? So if you're new here, I hope you get that someday. Thanks.